This is FBG Jen.
And FBG Kristen.
And I'm FBG Margot, host and producer. You're listening to the podcast that will help you keep a lid on the junk in the trunk and inspire you to live a happy and confident life.
Each episode, we chat with motivational experts and celebs and share our own candid adventures in being healthy.
If you're looking for a podcast that's equal parts hilarious and enlightening, well then welcome to the Fit Bottomed Girls podcast.
Welcome back to the Fit Bottomed Girls podcast. This is FBG Margot, and on the line today we have FBG Jen.
Hello, hello.
And we have FBG Kristen.
Hey!
And once again, we have an Olympian. How do we attract so many cool people to this show? We have Silken Lohmann, and she's just a fantastic interview. And Kristen, I guess you and I always take on the Canadians, right? We always have them. We always do it together. We do. So
we do.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about Silken before we start?
Yeah, so she's really like a household name in Canada. I was talking to a couple of my Canadian friends, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, yes, did you know this?" And I'm like, as a matter of fact, I did know these things about her. So she's a rower, and she was really badly injured in a rowing accident 10 weeks before the 92 Olympics, and it like shattered her right leg, and she came back to win bronze. She's, I will get into all of that in her interview, but the thing that, you guys, she is like the warmest, kindest person. You could just feel it through the phone. She was just like exuded like love and joy everywhere. So it was really a wonderful conversation. I just felt so happy after talking to her.
She's one of those people like Kristen. I was telling you, Jen, Kristen and I, before we even started the interview, we were connecting the Skype call and everything. And she just started asking questions about us. She's like, hey, So how'd you start the podcast? How's it going for you? I mean, she's very mellow and kind. And it was just like, you felt like you made a new friend that day, or you had a really great session with a therapist, maybe.
Yeah.
You just felt positive, and she had such great advice.
I think I invited her to hang out with me at the end.
Oh, you did?
Which is like, yeah, you guys, she's a really big deal. She doesn't want to come play with me, but I just like, you have this conversation, and it just really felt like we had just been, like I had met a friend out for dinner, and she was like, hey, do you mind if my friend Silken comes along? And, it felt more like that than talking to somebody who's such a big deal, except, as she's talking about her life experience, I'm like, oh, you're a really big freaking deal.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, in her Twitter bio, she says that she is an optimist on human nature, which I thought was extremely telling about like who she is, and it seemed very right. I had a feeling that you guys may have thoughts on that.
Well, I can just tell you, just from speaking to her, and one of the things I loved about the interview, and you guys definitely listen to this interview, she's great, but she talks about how she likes to compliment people to spread that really good energy. And, I'm looking at her notes for today, and I don't know if you guys have seen this yet, but there's a movie coming out called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And everybody's talking about this trailer because it's all about Mr. Rogers. And if you can watch this for about 1 minute, it's about 2 minutes long. If you can go through 1 minute without bursting into tears, you are far stronger than me. I mean, you just talk about a kind, empathetic human being and just how much we need that in the world. Like, that's the kind of feeling. Like, she's kind of like a Mr. Rogers in that way. She's just good and kind. And I felt like that warmth from this interview. So that's what I got from it.
Well, that's kind of like the, is that a Mr. Rogers saying, or is it from someone else? It's like, look for the helpers. Like,
Mr.
when
Rogers.
bad stuff is going on. Yeah, it's like, look for the helpers in any situation. I think that's like really beautiful. And there is a quote out of, apparently there are so many life lessons in kids stuff. There's a quote in Muppets Take Manhattan, which is like, who doesn't love the Muppets, right? Like, they're fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's in so Kermit works in a little diner in Manhattan. How well do you guys know this movie?
I love this movie.
I don't, so
okay.
You're going to have to explain.
Hang with me. It's great. So, of course, Kermit is actually Miss Piggy starts working. It doesn't matter. Okay, they're in this diner in New York. And the owner of it, he says, in a very heavy accent, he's like, people's is people's. And that's something that we quote in my house all the time, because it's kind of like, no matter where you've come from or what you've done or kind of like what you've been through, like people's is people's, and we're always just kind of doing the best that we can with what we've got. And so we always just try to keep that in mind, like that really, like we're all the same and we're doing the best that we can with what we've have. The other thing I always like to think about, and there was an amazing, I think it was a commercial or some sort of video that went viral, but it showed all these people, I think it was in a hospital. They were like, you like go into the elevator and there's little subtitles. It's like, this person's going through this, but this person's going through this, this person's going through this. And things like, you think that they, everyone should act politely and whatever, like all the time, but like you never know what someone's going through. So we should keep that in mind because we don't always just wear our emotion or our issues or our past trauma. Like most of us wear that on our sleeves, and hurt people tend to hurt people. So it usually comes from somewhere. So those are kind of I don't know. I agree.
Yeah,
I agree with her.
I agree with that too. But I think sometimes injured people injure others. They just don't know what to do. Yeah. And you kind of have to remember that about somebody and give them a break, or just, not internalize sometimes so much what people say and do to us when it's negative, because it could be from them coming from something completely different and you couldn't even manage. Right.
The other phrase I tend to use that goes so well with that is, it's not about me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's like, a big one.
That's not about me. That's about them. It's not about me. I mean, sometimes it is about you. If like someone's setting a boundary, you're like, where's my role in this? But usually it's not about, the world doesn't revolve around everything.
And that is hard for me because in my mind, literally everything is about me. So this has this is something that I have been working very hard on for quite some time now. What up, only children? Yeah.
Well, I'm the oldest daughter, so I've always had that sort of nurturing thing about me, and your little brother and sister always are looking up to you, and you should be looking out for them. So I kind of have that little bit of me too. Like I have a responsibility around me all the time, and sometimes I have to be like, no, you're not responsible for everything. Sometimes you just got to let things happen. You can't control it. Yeah. Boy, we all have our stuff, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Jen, like what you were saying, I think one of the phrases I try to keep in mind is be kind. You don't know what battle others are facing.
Yep.
And I try very hard to remember that. But I will say, like, often my default is not to assume the best about people.
Right.
And I'm trying to do better with that. And it's certainly, if I meet someone through another person, I'm of course far more likely to assume the best about them and assume that they have a good nature. But golly, I've been burnt by that a few times. And so it's hard because at the same time, I do tend to be pretty empathetic. And so I want to assume the best, and I want to be open to what another person is bringing into my life and what they're bringing out into the world. But sometimes that comes in and it's not what you want it to be. And I struggle with that a little bit, with kind of setting that boundary of keeping myself like in a nice, safe place, and then still being open to other people, because that's how you connect. And so, when you talk to somebody like Silken, it's really easy to be open and connect because you're like, oh yes, everything coming from her is good. But there are others who you meet on a regular basis and it's not that way. So I think that I'm an optimist on human nature, but I'm optimistic that I will become more of one as I grow and, kind of learn how to keep those boundaries firm, but, malleable, I guess.
Well, it sounds like she had a big impact on you.
Yeah, I thought she was great. And I really think that all of you guys are going to love her too.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. She's fantastic. So everybody, here we go. It's Silken Lohmann. In May 1992, just 10 weeks before the Olympic Games, Silken Lohmann was injured in a brutal rowing accident that left her right leg shattered and useless. Reigning world champion in single sculls rowing, Silken was told by doctors she might never row again. 27 days, 5 operations, and countless hours of grueling rehabilitation later, Silken was back in her shell, ready to pursue her Olympic dream. When the starter's pistol rang out on August 2nd, 1992, Silken made the greatest comeback in Canadian sports history, winning the bronze medal for Canada and capturing the hearts of a nation. This 4-time Olympian is one of Canada's most inspirational leaders, a best-selling author, and a highly recognizable and beloved athlete. as an elite athlete, a mental health and child advocate, a speaker, writer, and life coach. Silken has made her work reaching her own potential and helping others reach theirs. She's here today to talk about how to overcome injuries and body issues, plus how she likes to start each day. Welcome to the show, Silken.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. This is FBG Margot, and on the line today we have FBG Kristen.
Hey, guys.
So we're just going to take turns asking you questions, and Silken, I'm going to ask you the first one. Your achievements are so inspiring, and you personally overcoming incredible setbacks to Olympic glory. I mean, can you tell us a bit about what is your background that makes you so persistent and resilient? And as a follow-up, do you have any advice for people in our audience who are dealing with an injury right now?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. You know, how do any of us get where we are in our life, and you know, to try to break down and single out one experience in our life that taught us that persistence is hard to do. But I will say that I think early in my life I had lots of obstacles. I couldn't read until grade 4, and I think that made me quite determined at school and wanting to, you know, prove that I could do it. And I think the fact that my mom had an undiagnosed mental illness, and I was, you know, wrestling with that instability at home, lots of love, lots of creativity in the house, but also lots of instability. I mean, I think all of those things made me into a pretty self-determining tween and teenager, which kind of, you know, as I came into adulthood, those characteristics were pretty strongly formed in myself. You know, and then I got into sport, and I mean, I think sport is just such an incredible avenue for learning life skills. You know, like getting dumped into the river, like the first summer that I rowed. I mean, the very first summer that I learned to row, I literally tipped my boat over 20 times, which is actually a world record. Like, you know, so like I feel like I learned like lessons super early in my life, and like knowing that failure is part of our eventual success, because so many of us take failure and we make it mean something that it doesn't mean, right? It's like, rather than saying, oh, I just tipped the boat, you know, oh, I'm not very good, I'm never going to have what it takes, and fighting that inner voice and learning to fight that inner voice early, I think, was super helpful in later in my life having these huge goals, like having an accident 10 weeks before the Olympic Games.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
So I think the second part of your question, which was like, how do people deal with injuries? I mean, every athlete, I think any of us who work out regularly, we hate injuries, right?
Right.
You have your goals, whatever they are, and injuries sidetrack us, and it always feels so ultimate, like when you go from working out every day to not being able to work out at all sometimes for a while. And so what I have noticed in my life, and I just had major foot surgery again 14 months ago, and I had 3 months where I was non-weight bearing.
Oh my gosh.
And you know, I had just finished doing, you know, my little long distance triathlon, and you know, I was in really good shape when I had surgery, and I just looked at it as an opportunity to focus on other things in my life for a while, because, you know, staying active and staying fit can take a big part of our day. You know, it can take a couple hours a day. And I thought, well, I'll still do whatever I can. And at that time, it was just some stretching and a little bit of upper body work. And I used that other time to read a little bit more and to visit with friends a little bit more. And I try to look at those breaks as kind of gifts and an opportunity to explore a different side of myself.
I can't tell you how much I love that, because I'm coming off an injury, and the thing that everyone has said to me is, you know, oh my God, how are you dealing with not being able to do all of your regular stuff? Are you going insane? And, you know, and I'm like, it's not been easy. You know, I would certainly prefer to be doing all of my normal activities. But yeah, it has kind of opened up some options where I do have a little more time for other things, which is not a terrible thing overall.
Well, yeah, and I think, you know, when you've worked out as long as I have, I mean, I've worked out pretty well most of my life since I was 11 years old, and I'm now in my early 50s, and you start to get a long-term view of health and fitness and wellness, and really recognize it's not what you do over a 3-month period. It's not what you do even over a year. It's what you do over your lifetime that has the greatest impact. And, you build on, you build on different areas of your fitness. You might have a focus on aerobics for a few years and then move more into strength training. And there's these sort of cycles that we go through. But overall, the main thing is that we're challenging our bodies, that we're, enjoying movement, that we're, keeping our bodies strong and pliable. And you can have those periods of time where either you're injured or, work or kids or like whatever it is takes over and it takes a bigger piece of our life. And that's just life.
Yeah, it is. So speaking of life, you are not just this, amazing, unparalleled athlete. You're also a speaker and a life coach and an author and an advocate. And so I'm curious, how do you balance that? And I wondered, does each aspect of that kind of take the spotlight at different times, like you were just saying, or do you really sort of spin all the plates all the time?
Oh, I love what you just said. Does each aspect take the spotlight? That's a great way of looking at it because that's exactly what it is. I just think we all, especially women, we listen to each other's accomplishments. And yes, I'm an Olympic athlete and I'm an advocate for, young people and health. And I do life coaching and I've always been an active speaker. I'm a writer. It sounds like, oh my God, right? But
you're kind of impressive.
We all, thank you. But I think we all are, right? And we do these things at different points in our life, right? So when my kids were young, I was mostly speaking and raising kids, and that was most of my life. And I did write a book in the middle of the night, which is I think where most books get written when you have little kids.
Yeah.
But I also kind of I also pushed myself to the point of really crashing too. So I learned the hard way that you can't have it all at once. And that was great advice I was given by a woman who was older than I was when I was in my 20s. And she said to me, Silken, you can have it all. Like you really can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And so I love that idea that you've just presented, which is that there are times in our life when one aspect of our life holds the spotlight. And I've really that really resonates with me, and that's what I have found true in my life. Obviously, when I was an athlete, it was so singularly focused. Every morning you wake up and you just think about your training and your you almost wake up with butterflies in the morning because the workouts are going to be so intense and you're pushing your body to the extreme, and you go to bed exhausted every night and your body weighs 10,000 pounds because of the lactic acid.
Right.
And then you wake up the next morning and you do it all again. And that's one part of life. And then of course that changes, and then for me, my kids were born almost right away, and then that becomes such a consuming focus because you're nursing and you're trying to work and you're still trying to sort of be fit, and and this is what real life is all about.
So we talked to sports psychologist Amy Baltzall, and who's also an Olympic rower for the States, and we were talking about what it takes to be an elite athlete. It's more than just the intense training schedule. There's also a mindset on how you handle stress and the unknown. So can you give us your feelings about what it takes to be an athlete, an elite athlete? Is it equal parts mental and physical?
Well, certainly, for instance, to be a rower, it's really helpful to be tall because, you don't see many 5-foot rowers,
Nope.
And you don't see many 6-foot gymnasts. So it's all fair in the end. we get to choose a sport that, hopefully fits our body ideally. And rowing seems to be a great sport for these tall, sometimes a little uncoordinated, the ones that didn't make the basketball team or the volleyball team. Really good rowers. So I think the physical piece it's a huge part and very important. But when you get to the world level, everybody has physical talent there. There's no question about that. And it is the mental that is so hugely important. That ability to be, narrowly focused and have that, I don't want to say positive because it sounds too Pollyannish, but to be focusing on what you want rather than spending too much time on what you don't want. To be able to handle the pressure. So, a lot of that, being able to handle the pressure is, being at sort of some level of peace with yourself and, making it so that whether you win or lose, it doesn't reflect on, who you are as a human being, but it's, you still have that incredible competitive desire. So I think, like when you watch the Olympics, and of course it's a great time to be talking about it because we just the closing ceremonies were on Saturday, and you see those Olympians, and they're all talented, and they're all work incredibly hard. But who has that edge? Who is willing to push that much harder? Who has learned to tolerate the pain? It's certainly in rowing. Rowing is a sport of pain, and to be overcoming that lactic acid, that fatigue in your muscles, that burning in your lungs. That's mental skill.
Yeah, I live in Sarasota, and we've got in Florida, and I'm friends with a few rowers, and some of them I've run with, and they're like, oh yeah, rowing is a whole different level of being in the pain cave for like a long time and just accepting it. And once you can get your mind around that, a lot of the runs that we do don't seem like such a big deal, which I think is amazing because I think running is really hard.
Yeah, and rowers are often not great runners either because they're bigger people.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it is, and that's true. Like people will always ask, like at the elite level, how much is mental and how much is physical, and you can't really break it down to percentage because you have to have the physical, right? So
Sure.
if you have half the physical, it's not enough. You've got to have the physical ability. But I will say that every athlete at the Olympics has a physical ability. So then it comes down to who's got that stronger drive, who's got that stronger focus, who's willing to give up more in order to win. Who shows up in the starting gates and maybe they're as nervous as heck, but they're still able to overcome those nerves and race the race that they need to, which is the Olympic final. And I'm so grateful for me that my career went on long enough. I raced at 4 Olympic Games, that by the last 2 Olympic Games, mentally I was always there in those big races. I always knew, and I got to a point where I could rely on it, where I knew that I would have my mental game together.
Wow. So let me ask you, since we're talking about the Olympics and just coming off of the Winter Olympics, so are there any sports that you really, really love watching as a spectator? And I'm also curious, just because you have, been at a number of games, did you get to go and watch as a spectator when you were an athlete, or did you have to focus so strongly on your own races that you couldn't even do that?
Well, I'm so lucky in my life in that because of my story here in Canada, I became a very high-profile Canadian, and because of that, I've been invited back to many Olympics and have seen and pretty well gone to any event that I've wanted to go watch. And of course, I think, like everybody, you have a particular interest in sports that either a lot like the sport you love, or that you've actually done. So, like, I'm weirdly fascinated by the cross-country skiing in the Winter Olympics because one, I've cross-country skied, but also I really get, like, when you do like the 50K, I really get like how much these people are hurting, and in a way that I just don't get when I see the double skeleton. Like, I look at the double skeleton, I'm like, did that sport get invented when people were drinking? And they're like, let's see if we put like two people on the skeleton, what happens? Now, I'm sure the athleticism is unbelievable, and like the guts to go down, is like incredible. I see mind blowing, but I can't relate to it in the same way because I've never done it, right?
Yeah.
So I find, like, in the Winter Olympics, I'm attracted to things that somehow I can understand the athleticism of, like, even though like the figure skating, I don't get it in that, like, I've never done anything even mildly graceful. but I do appreciate, what it's like to do a box jump, and I do appreciate what it's like to, like, try to lift your body and how much core they must have in it, and I just appreciate the artistry of the figure skating. So I'd say in the winter, it's the cross-country skiing and the figure skating and the downhill skiing too. I mean, I think, like, I watched them go from edge to edge, and it just like blows me away.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, again, it's sports that I don't really do, but I just understand the athleticism, like, swimming. I love watching swimming in the Summer Olympics. They're always so exciting, right? And Phelps, of course, has made swimming, over a decade now, incredible to watch. And my son grew up on Michael Phelps and, watched his first Olympics when he was 6 years old and is now a rower aspiring one day to make a national team. So it's kind of cool too, like to see it through your kids' eyes.
Oh, that's cool.
So you've discussed in your memoir, Unsinkable, that you've struggled with body image and eating disorders, especially when you were a teenager. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about that. Like, what's been key to your recovery for that?
I think the thing about having an eating disorder is that maybe there's an aspect of it that you always have to be wary of. Like it's not unlike, if you've had a problem with drinking in the past, that there's certain environments, that there's certain situations that you probably don't do well in. So I don't do well when I'm around other people who have eating disorders or who are, artificially controlling their weight, and I've kind of recognized that. So what helped me a lot, like I had my eating disorder, I was like 15, when it started, and it was a lot. It was about control. It was about living in a family situation that felt out of control. My parents were divorcing at the time. As I mentioned earlier, my mom had really erratic behavior, and I think it seemed to me in my messed up way of looking at things that my weight was something I could control. And I was obsessed with perfection. I wanted to be, achieving in every area of my life. And somehow I got it twisted in my head that controlling my weight and controlling the way I looked was also, something that was in my control. And which is pretty funny when you think about being 15, like your weight is actually not in your control because you're growing and changing and your body's changing. But I was desperate to have control over that piece of my life, and it caused me so much pain and so much grief. And when I think about the years that I wasted thinking about what I was going to eat and what I was not going to eat and how fat I was, and the loathing, the emotions that came up. I mean, I'm so grateful this many years later to be free of it. And when I've reached places in my life where my life feels out of control, and I think there's just sort of situational things that can happen in our life. So for me, the last time I really struggled was at the end of my marriage, which was 15 years ago, and the eating disorder emerged again, and I had to kind of recognize it for what it was and do some counseling to move beyond it. So I've recognized the triggers, which are usually intense amounts of stress and places in my life where my life will feel out of control. And as I said, being around people who are affected by active eating disorders today.
Well, first off, let me just say that I really applaud you for sharing your story about this and being so outspoken and being an advocate, because it's, obviously eating disorders are incredibly prevalent. But I think that you also bring a really interesting and helpful angle to it, in that you talk a lot about how being a very strong elite athlete did not save you from having issues with body image. And, so many of us can get caught up in watching our favorite athletes, and, we do see them as just being these like strong, amazing, capable women and men, but that doesn't mean that they're immune from negative self-talk and destructive behavior. So I wonder if would you be able to maybe touch on things that we, and by we I mean us, those of us who are, strong athletes, and also those of us who are around other strong athletes, what are things that we can do to better identify and help people with, disordered body image or disordered eating?
Oh, it's such a big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I've had the pleasure of having, 3 girls in my life. I've got my daughter Kate, and then 2 stepdaughters, and my son. And I think, like, from a raising kids perspective, I was very aware that I was at the real risk of passing on some of my messed up views on my own body that I had earlier to my kids, right? And so I just did things like, I was very conscious about how I talked about my body. I was very conscious about, not having scales in the house. I would always talk about strong, beautiful bodies, how it was so beautiful to be strong and so healthy to be strong. And I would comment on other athlete bodies and say, wow, it's so beautiful to see somebody that strong or that flexible. So I felt like I was counteracting all that garbage that we see every single day about these stick women who are so unhealthy. I mean, the percentage of women that are stick-like naturally is so small, and yet that's what's presented as the ideal. And we continue to look at magazines that, have 18-year-old girls presenting themselves like they're 28-year-old girls. And, the body that you have at 18 is very different than the body you have at 28, you know what I mean? And so I felt like at least I was doing what I could to counteract this discourse that was out there. My daughter wanted to model when she was young. I definitely encouraged the sport, and I kept saying you can do it later. And, now she's at Harvard rowing and being in school, and it's kind of too late.
Wow.
She got interested in other things, right? So that was my little piece, but in raising my kids. But I mean, I guess I just think about the years that my voice was the cruelest voice on the planet, kind of thing, right? And I would never speak to another human being the way that I spoke to myself. And the loathing and the hatred that I pushed towards my body. I mean, and I know that I am not unique in that so many women and girls struggle with this. So I make a point of telling people that they're beautiful and being sincere in that, and by commenting, I love what you're wearing, or I love your choice of colors, or when somebody says something negative about their body, to counteract that right away, because I know that their voice is playing 10 times over the negative. And I think by sharing, for me, a big part of how I got a healthier body image was to get a healthier sense of self and to do that deeper healing work from growing up in a house that created some real warps in my personality. And as I began to really love myself and understand and have compassion towards myself, my image of my body changed in my inside image of my body. And I love my body today. And I feel so comfortable in my own skin. And when I do get on a negative track, I recognize it and go, like, why am I talking to myself this way? This is ridiculous. Like, I would never talk to my worst enemy this way. So some of it is even just recognizing it, recognizing that voice inside our head, and what are we actually saying? I mean, I give my clients an exercise, like, write down the crap you say to yourself. Write it down in a journal for a week, some of the crap that's in your head. And when they see it written down and they have some objectivity on it, and we go through it together, they're like, wow, I don't want to say this to myself.
Right.
Right. We interviewed Lou Retton last spring, and one of the things I love from the interview is that she said she struggles to this day. Like, she wants to be the kind of person that when she walks into a room, she doesn't care what anybody's thinking of her, right? Like, she's just so comfortable in her skin, and that's sort of her goal too. And you think, like, Lou Retton, you've done everything. What are you insecure about? But it's true. Like, we all have something, right?
But we're all on, I think this is the thing that we recognize, and I'm sure that, you both, having interviewed now so many different women and so many strong, powerful women, are recognizing, right, is that we're all on this human journey, and this human journey it involves self-doubt and, insecurity, and that's just part of being human. And that inner voice that we have, unfortunately, it often is this negative critic that's inside our head. And I think like just recognize that, okay, so we all have that. Even like the most accomplished people have it. So how do people move beyond it, right? So that's the important question. How do we move beyond it, right? And I think like one, recognizing that voice and realizing that you can do the things that you want to do despite the fact that you have self-doubt. Sometimes your desire to do it has to just be slightly stronger than your fear of doing it, or your self-doubt about doing something. It might always be there. I mean, I'm sure when the two of you started the podcast, you were like, oh, I don't know, who's going to listen to us? Right? Why do we have anything to say? Right? and
nailed it.
Well, you did. Yeah, exactly, right. But here you are, and I think that we're all dealing with that. And so what I love today is that we live in a much more open society where people are talking about their struggles. People are talking about their eating disorders and their bouts with depression, and they're talking about the doubt that they have. Even even incredibly accomplished people, like where you say, like, I mean, when Robin Williams,
right,
killed himself. I mean, I think all of us were like, what? That's impossible. And then we come back to, no, in the end of the day, no matter what you have, no matter, how much you've accomplished, you may be dealing with demons that nobody understands. And the more that we're open about it and the more that we can share and have these kind of conversations, the more that we learn from each other and say, oh, well, look, she went to the Olympics 4 times. She did all this stuff. And wow, like she had a pretty tough upbringing. She struggled with her body image. She struggled with depression and anxiety. So I think there's value in itself to the conversation that we're having today.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So, one of the things that I love, we were talking about how we've spoken to a lot of really inspiring people. And every once in a while I get a chance to ask what their morning routines look like. And I think that can be really interesting. So I wondered if you would share what a typical morning would look like for you.
I'll share my morning this morning.
Yes.
Which is pretty typical morning routine. I wake up about 6:30. And the first thing I do, and I started this maybe 10 years ago, I wear mala beads on my wrist. And there's 27 of them, and I touch each bead. And every time I touch a bead, I think of something that I'm grateful for. So I begin my day being grateful. That comes before I pick up the iPhone. It comes before I, get on the computer. It comes before anything. And I have noticed that has been a pretty transforming practice. Then I jump into the shower like everybody else, and rush out of the bathroom. And if I'm doing my workout that morning, or if I'm writing or something, I might stay in the flexi clothes. And the next thing I like to do is just 20 minutes, maybe 30, of yoga and meditation. And so, in the middle of my living room, I pull out my mat. And some days I just meditate. I just sit there and meditate. Other days, I've got this little sort of yoga stretching routine, and then I finish with a 10-minute meditation, really short. So by now it's almost 7:30. I've had this lovely entrance to the day.
Silken?
Hello?
Hi, I'm sorry.
Yes.
We got knocked off for some reason.
That was really weird. It was just like nothing.
I was captivated listening to you, and then it was silence.
Yes.
I have a ritual around making tea in the morning. I just take my time and I choose my tea and I boil the water, and I just try to be very present to it. And I find it really relaxing. So by the time everybody else in the house, arrives in the kitchen, I feel like I've already had this little piece of my day that's been peaceful. And I used to work out first thing in the morning. I'd get up really early to work out. And I love that, in that, lots of studies have proven, you're more likely to stick to your workout routine if you work out first thing in the morning before work and all this thing. And I agree with all that. But I found, for me, having that quietness for that first hour has been very transforming, and it's been a really great way also to connect to my creativity. Mm-hmm. So I find if I'm going to have a day of writing or blogging or whatever I'm doing that's creative that morning, I have a higher level of creativity if I've started in that more peaceful way. Now, I'm like everybody else. There's those mornings where, like, I've got a plane to catch.
Right.
The kids are up early or something, or somebody's got some problem, and, I kind of rush through my morning routine, drinking the coffee while I'm practically in the shower, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I said, that's life. This is the routine that I honor probably 5 days out of 7.
So let me ask you.
That is beautiful.
That is beautiful. So what are your workouts like then? Is it just the yoga, or are you into anything else?
No. So I do my workouts. I usually do them at the end of the day now. So I'll do something in the morning. So I'll do my yoga. But no, I work out pretty intensely. I do my spin bike or my bike. So I'm a cyclist. I love cycling, and I twice a week will do anywhere between an hour and 2 hours with other people. And so that's twice a week. And then I go to my swim club twice a week, and that's intense as well. That's a real workout where you get your heart rate up high. And then I lift twice a week as well. So I usually lift on Monday and Friday mornings. I lift around 8 o'clock, so I still have time for that morning routine. And then Saturday is a big day, and I try to, I try to work out 5 or 6 times a week. Sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. When life gets a little crazier, it's less, and when I've got a little bit more discretionary time, it's more. And I think it's so there's elements of my workout routine that I see. We were sort of talking how our workout routines ebb and flows, and now having been active for so many years, I think I have pulled out a few pearls. One of them is strength training. Strength training is so incredibly important for women, and it's something that so many women seem to have an aversion to doing. I don't know where it comes from. I'm going to get big and bulky. I like aerobics, aerobic activity because it burns more calories, and a lot of misconceptions, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you want to change your body and build muscle in your body and burn more calories, weight training is the way to do it. But just for life, if you're not squatting and you're not lunging and you're not, working your shoulders in the full range, you are going to lose those motions for everyday life. This is real stuff. We really have to pay attention to it. So of course, it's about bone density. It's about releasing testosterone. It's about a lot of great hormonal effects of exercise. I think that's really important. But it's also about we want to go into our 60s and 70s and 80s being able to lift things and being able to, rotate our bodies and not have our disc give out because we don't have any muscle in our backs, right?
Yeah.
And I tell you, I train with some pretty inspiring women. I train in the lane next to a woman who's 72, and she's, she bikes 3 times a week, and I'm talking, she goes and does 2 hours on her spin trainer, and she does an hour and 15 minutes in the pool, and you can still train at a very high level into your senior years. But it's got to start a lot of women are not doing weights in their 40s, and I just think it's a critical mistake. And if you want to age well, you also need to age strong.
Yeah, that's brilliant. One of my favorite things about triathlon is I honestly love getting passed by a man or woman with an age written on the back of their calf that is much, much higher than my age. I don't even feel bad about it because I'm just you know what? That's just inspiring me. That just lets me know I've still got a chance to kick more butt for many more years.
Triathlon's pretty inspiring. Some of the athletes in triathlon, they're just super hardcore, and you look at their leg and it's a 69, and you're like, whoa.
Yeah, I had a guy with, I think it was I don't know, it was he was 68 or something, and he passed me on a mountain bike. And
okay,
that's what is happening right now?
I don't know, was that inspiring really, or are you just kind of putting that in perspective now?
Well, I was a little pissed at the time, I won't lie, but afterwards I was just you know what, good job, man. And I saw him out on the run course, and actually, didn't stop, but as I ran along with him for a little bit, I was like, dude, you are amazing on the bike. And turns out that he did a lot of it, which makes sense because he was killing it. So now I feel inspired.
Totally
At the time, maybe.
Yeah, and I think, you two are both in an environment where you're, hanging out with a lot of strong women and strong personalities, strong bodies, and it becomes what you accept. I started working out in the 70s, and my first sport was running. And I used to run around the neighborhood. People still in my hometown of Mississauga remember me, older people remember me as that girl who ran by herself in the 70s, right?
Wow.
That was actually a little weird back then. And it was very normal for guys to catcall you out of their cars, sometimes to pinch your butt when they cycled by or drove by or ran by, like that what you tolerated, right? And how, and I think now, right? And I think about my daughter going to school, to row, and the opportunity she's been given, and like there's just no doubt that the women's rowing program would be funded, and things have changed so much. But what still lingers is this discomfort that so many women feel with having strong muscles and having visible muscles, and it's kind of reinforced too by the way that clothing, I feel like sometimes is just not designed for muscles. It's like if they just put more stretch in things, everything would be better.
Yep.
Give me something in the shoulders, guys. That's all I need. Just give me some shoulders.
Exactly.
Oh. So this is a big question, but with everything that you have accomplished, if you had to choose one shining moment that just stands out more than any other, and that can be, as an athlete, as a parent, as a speaker, whatever, is there one that you could pick?
So I guess the moment I would pick was not so much my most shining moment, but a moment that showed me what is possible. So I think I had always had, since I picked up an oar, I'd always had the dream of going to the Olympics and winning a medal, and maybe even winning a gold medal, and doing it in the single. And that was just such a motivating and inspiring dream for me to have. And I think I believed it on lots of levels, but there was just that part where, you doubt yourself. And in 1990 at the World Championships, I had changed coaches, I had changed teams, I had changed the environment, and I was ranked 7th in the world. And I went into the semifinal, so there's 6 boats in each semifinal, and you have to come in top 3 to qualify for the final. And I drew in my semifinal the world champion, the silver medalist, and the bronze medalist from the year before, like basically the whole stack, and I had to come top 3. And the race was in Tasmania. I had this incredible race. I crossed the finish line first, and I beat the world champion, the silver medalist, and the bronze medalist from the year before. And why I also remember this moment is a photograph was snapped about 2 seconds after I crossed the finish line, and literally my arms are up in prayer to the sky. I have this look of utter shock and disbelief. And I remember that moment because in that moment I saw what was possible. And it's probably the moment I've come back to the most in my life, because there's sort of like a before and after. How I felt and thought before, and then having this breakthrough moment, and then what happened after, which was I became the world champion. And I think about that in other areas of my life, right? Like, what is my perception of what I can do? And when will that moment happen where I realize what I really can do? Because I know it's out there for everything that I do. And I think that's true for all of us, right? We have we kind of have our we got our dreams and we've got our goals and stuff, right? But then we're always operating with this belief system that's limiting us. And then sometimes we get this gift, this performance, or this essay, or this article we write, and it gets, and it gets accepted in a publication. We just never, we just hope that we would be accepted, and then we go, wow, look what could be possible.
In 2015, speaking of that, you were inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame. Can you tell us what that experience was like? Kristen and I are both big Canada files. I think we told you that off the air, so I need to hear this.
Well, it's kind of like, it's our own Canadian version of, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, but ours is in Toronto, and it was a very much a Hollywood moment. It was a Canadian Hollywood moment, right? So I'd been the first rower inducted, and I think only the second or maybe third athlete. Like, it was a pretty huge honor, and it was definitely a red carpet experience, like the fancy gold dress, and I got my hair done, and they had like makeup artists in your limos fixing your makeup before you got on the red carpet. And,
wow.
I'm an athlete. I've been fortunate enough in Canada to have done many kind of high profile things, but this was really a piece of Hollywood, but it was a Canadian experience. And to Michael Bublé was inducted the same year, and to Wendy Crewson, who's this fabulous actress, and to be able to, be in that kind of company, and to feel like, this is a club, and to hear Michael Bublé say to me, like, oh, I've watched you since I was a kid, and I'm so excited to meet you, and I'm like, what?
Oh my gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Exactly. And then to be on stage, and my acceptance speech was a lot about gratefulness and love, and how grateful I was for all of my life and all of my experiences, even the ones that have been so tough, because they made me into who I am today, and I like who I am today. And my dad was in the audience, my daughter was in the audience. It was a very, very special experience, and one I will never forget. And what an honor to have your star, on the Canada's Walk of Fame, and to be part of that really special club of people who brought honor to Canada. And I'm so grateful.
Oh. Well, I'm not surprised to hear that was the theme of your acceptance speech, because that is totally what has just like poured over me through our whole conversation today. Is, you really have such a wonderful energy, and just a, gratitude and love seems first and foremost. And I've loved getting to hear about it. I think I'm very inspired all around.
It's been a pleasure, and like I said, we have so much to learn from one another, And I've got my story and my path and sort of my perspectives, having lived a pretty full life, and other people have theirs. And whenever I listen to a podcast, especially from a woman who has had some sort of parallel experience, I learn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we have one more question. It's maybe not quite as deep and moving as some of the others we've discussed today, but it's something that we ask all of our guests, and that is, what was the last song that you listened to before you joined us today?
I don't know if this is not going to be cool enough, I'm sure, but I listened to Diva Primal this morning when I did my meditation. Would encourage listeners who love music when they're doing their yoga or their meditation that is beautiful and spiritual and connected. Diva Primal is amazing, and I've been listening to her. I think my kids sing Diva Primal without realizing it, because they've been listening to it since they were 2 and 4 years old.
Oh, that's great.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. You are a wonderful guest, and I really enjoyed talking to you as well. This was really, really special.
Oh, thank you. Well, the feeling's mutual. Take good care.
Thank you. And let me also say, if you ever happen to be coming down to Sarasota for any of the world rowing adventures or anything, look me up. I would be more than honored to be able to, take you for a coffee or something, or just show you the beach or whatever. Consider me your official tour guide if you need one.
And it's always lovely when you travel to connect with people that you've met, even if you've only met them virtually through a wonderful podcast.
Aww.
Love this show? Tell us why in a 5-star review on iTunes, and we'll read it on the air. Also, make sure you are a subscriber. If you want to reach out to say hi or have a question about a recent episode, yay, well, feel free to email us at podcast@fitbottomedgirls.com. And if this podcast jives perfectly with your brand, consider sponsoring the show. Get more info by emailing advertising@fitbottomgirls.com. Find all kinds of Fit Bottom goodness online and on social media at Fit Bottom Girls, Fit Bottom Mamas, Fit Bottom Eats, and Fit Bottom Zen. And if books and movies are your thing, check out the other podcast I co-host called Book versus Movie, which you can find anywhere where you search for podcasts. Thanks for listening.